Okay, I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and we're finally starting on time. So I'd like that noted for the record.
Shortly. Right.
Yes, that's right. Go out strong. Thank you all for being here. I will now call this meeting of the El Paso County Planning Commission to order. I'm Tom Bailey, serving as the chair for one of a handful of remaining times, I think. And so, again, good morning. Thank you for being here. It's nice to see at least a few people in the audience. That's good. I don't know if we have anybody online, but we will get started because we have such an extensive agenda today. We'll see if we can work our way through it. As always, we begin with a report from the Planning Department. Ms. Harrington or Mr. Kilgore or both, do you have anything for us?
I have nothing this morning, Chair. Justin.
I just want to lodge a complaint that I went downstairs and they said the chair ate all the bacon, so.
Yeah, I didn't eat all of it. I thought I left a piece or two, but I'm sorry. Yes, guilty as charged.
He's not sorry. Say you're sorry, but
Not so much.
sounds like you're not.
I just want to say on behalf of the commissioners, thank you, Ms. Harrington, Justin, and staff for the breakfast. We appreciate what you do, so having you say that you appreciate us with a little breakfast every once in a while was very much appreciated. It's good to get to know the rest of the staff who we don't always see out here. Some of the people we see far too often. So it's good to see some of the behind the scenes folks. Yeah.
We're not going to point fingers.
But no, thank you. It was very much appreciated. And, as I said in there, I think we really appreciate everything that you and the staff do for us. Makes this job a little bit easier and a lot easier. And we appreciate it. Okay, and I see on the note here, I'll try to repeat it next time, we're due to meet again on March 20th, 2 weeks from today. And so we'll look forward to that. Next item on the agenda is time for public comment on items that are not on today's agenda. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on something that's not on our agenda today? And Ms. Miriam, do we have anybody online for us listening? Nobody listening, other than I will point out that Ms. Sego, the county attorney, is online. She is there if we need her. She's just not in her normal seat. So, good morning, Ms. Sego. Thanks for joining us. And we'll move on to our consent items. The first of which is item 3A, which is the adoption of minutes from the hearing that we held here 2 weeks ago on February 20th. Was in our packets, as always, a good summary of our efforts. Were there any questions, corrections, additions, deletions, anything to those minutes? Seeing none, we'll deem those approved as they were presented to us. Thank you, and we'll move on then to item 3B, which is file number SF2433. This is the final plat for the Berkheimer subdivision. Do any commissioners have any questions for staff or comments on this one, Mr. Moraes?
Just like Mr. Leckie, just to talk about the letter that just came in about the environmental study. Since a citizen wrote about it, I'd like to at least address it.
And while you're on the way up, is there anybody here in the audience other than the applicant who's here for that particular item? I don't see anybody. That's the letter that was sent mentions that they couldn't be here, but let's get a quick summary, please.
Good morning, Planning Commission. My name is Joseph Letke. I was a planner project manager for this item. Mr. Moraes, I did reach out to the gentleman who wrote that letter. We review each doc or submittal differently, and depending on location, geography, natural features, we determine if that type of report is required. For this specific project, we did not require a natural features report because the property is not heavily forested. It's not located within a floodplain zone. In our GIS system, it has a low wildlife impact potential, and there's no concerns about the federally protected endangered species known as the Preble's meadow jumping mouse. In that letter, there's some mention of wetlands. I did research on this through the USGS wetlands inventory, and I did not find a nationally recognized wetland. There is some shallow groundwater at the site, but that's noted as a plat note 10 on the face of the plat. And then I did send this application to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I did send it a request for comments from the Colorado State Forestry Service. And then lastly, I did send it to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. All three of these agencies did not have any outstanding comments or major concerns or requested that we need a report like this. So because of those reasons, we didn't require that. And I know the Black Forest area does have a lot of wildlife. However, I do have to make consideration with the facts that I have through our systems and also rely on some of those other federal and state agencies.
Thank you.
Mr. Whitney.
Just for my education, if I recall right, this one is in the burn scar area. Does that raise special issues for you when you look at these applications?
They can. If there's significant slope, I do usually have concerns about potential landslide, or if there's a floodplain, that especially. For this, being that it's in the burn sky, I didn't really have too many concerns with this specific site.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Letke.
Thank you.
Again, anything else? And one last check. Nobody here in the audience is here for this item. So with no more discussion, if I will entertain a motion on agenda item 3B, SF2433.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Fuller.
Mr. Chair, with regards to agenda item 3B, file SF2433, a final plat for Berkheimer subdivision, I move for approval in accordance with the attached resolution with, oh, dang it. Where is that? 5 conditions and 4 notations, and a recommendation of finding for sufficiency with regard to water quality, quantity, and dependability, and that this item be forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners for their consideration.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Fuller and Mr. Trowbridge. Any last comments before we vote on this? Seeing none, make it easy on myself for a change and go in order on my sheet. First of all, I guess we have a motion and a second, so I will
Did you play the
continue with that. I will, as we go, appoint the voting members because they're everyone that you see here. Oops. So I'll call the roll and then,
So efficient.
and Ms. Miriam will fix this in the minutes so it will look like I did my job exactly as I was supposed to. I started out strong and I dropped it right away. So we'll begin. Ms. Jack. Would you like to vote yes or no?
Yes.
An aye for Ms. Jack. Mr. Byers.
Aye.
Mr. Carlson.
Aye.
Ms. Fuller.
Aye.
Mr. Moraes.
Aye.
Mr. Shipples.
Aye.
Mr. Trowbridge.
Aye.
And Mr. Whitney.
Aye.
And the chair will also vote aye. So you have just seen all 9 regular members who are voting at today's meeting. And I thank you for your continued indulgence of my incompetence. And we will move on then very quickly to get past that to agenda item 3C, which is file number SP 236. This is the preliminary plan for Meadow Lake Industrial Phase 1. Is there any commissioners have questions for staff or for the applicant? Is there anyone here in the audience for this other than the applicant? I don't see any. And our note was for, there was an email on this. I think, are we all okay here? Seeing no discussion, I'll entertain a motion on file number SP 236.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carlson.
Mr. Chair, regards to agenda item 3C, file number SP 236, preliminary plan for Meadow Lake Industrial Phase 1. I move for approval in accordance with the attached resolution with 1 condition, 4 notations, and 1 waiver, no requirement for water findings, and that this item be forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners for their consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Second from Mr. Shipples. Thank you. Any last discussion? Stay consistent this time and begin with Ms. Jack.
Aye.
Mr. Byers.
Aye.
Mr. Carlson.
Aye.
Ms. Fuller.
Aye.
Mr. Moraes.
Aye.
Mr. Shipples.
Aye.
Mr. Trowbridge.
Aye.
Mr. Whitney.
Aye.
The chair will also vote aye. We will again recommend this to the Board of County Commissioners for their approval on a vote of 9-0. Moving on to our last agenda item, 3D, file number VA 248. This is a variance of use for 7695 Ponca Road. It's filed by Turf Master LLC. Anyone have any questions for staff on this? Ms. Fuller.
Is this currently being used as a contractor's equipment yard? So this is just a new use? I was wondering if there was a complaint or something. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Trowbridge.
Can we hear this, at least in an abbreviated fashion? I have
I see
questions.
a couple,
I have questions about the compatibility.
we have that power, so why don't we go ahead and do that? And so if you would please come up and give us a brief summary, and then we will move on from there. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. I didn't get a chance to speak to each one of you this morning, but
maybe at some point we'll get to chat. I'm Lisa Elgin. I am the project manager for this, and Joe Sandstrom was the engineer on this project, but he is out of the office today, so Daniel Torres will be here to answer any of your questions. If there is anyone watching this remotely and you would like to speak, we would ask that you please email your name and a reliable phone number to pcdhearings@elpasoco.com. The applicant has requested a variance of use to allow a contractor's equipment yard in the RR5 residential rural zone district, and that's also in the commercial airport overlay district. The definition is contractor's equipment yard is a service establishment primarily engaged in general contracting or subcontracting in the construction, repair, maintenance, or landscape trades. This is for landscaping. We are processing this as a variance of use because a contractor's equipment yard is not allowed as an allowable use or special use in this district. And we must comply with the review criteria and the development standards for the RR5. This is a list of the criteria of approval. I'll just give you a minute to look at that. There's a lot there. Okay. No neighbors have contacted the office at all with concerns or support for the requested variance of use. There's a zoning map. You can see it's a well-established, long-established RR5 district, and it's slowly getting surrounded by residential within the city of Colorado Springs. Some information on the CADO zone district. The warehouse industrial use is an allowed use in that overlay district, which is what we would consider this to be. We got a site plan if anyone hasn't had an opportunity to look at that. As you can see, they're proposing 3 pole barns with this. There's a parking area for their employees in the kind of northwest area there from the driveway. All of that gray area is proposed to be gravelled for them to drive their trucks and equipment on. The property is zoned residential rural, but it is located within a suburban residential place type. And the areas within the city of Colorado Springs that have residential next to this neighborhood, they're fairly small lots. The minimal change undeveloped designation wants to limit the scale of any redevelopment that could alter the essential character of the area. Perhaps if all of the equipment is stored inside the new buildings, the pole barns that they're proposing, if it's all stored inside, it may not have much effect on the surrounding homes. And I'm sorry, this is for Mr. Torres.
Back to the map. The
site plan?
No, Mr. Torres slide. But give us just to the northwest of Ponca and Woodman is the church. Is that correct? Give us a rundown of what's around here, if you would, please. As much as you know, it seems like a church. I think I saw a church site someplace, and then
Yes.
at Mohawk and
so.
Woodman, the frontage road there
There are actually 2 churches.
is another
there's-
church.
There's a church on the bottom left, the school is on the bottom right, and there's another church, I believe, right next to that, on to the right of that, to the east.
On the other side of Mohawk.
Yes,
Okay. And then the rest that we see there are just our 5 single-family
yes.
residences and associated buildings. Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Daniel Torres with Engineering. In terms of traffic, a traffic study was not required due to the low impact in traffic that this would generate. No offsite improvements were required, and the property is subject to the road impact fee. In terms of drainage, it's within Sand Creek Drainage Basin. Fees are not assessed with variance of use applications, nor with the subsequent site development application that would be submitted. Property generally drains to the east and then south. On the property, a drainage report will be required with the site development plan. Any questions on the engineering slides?
I'm just curious, when I'm reading through the staff report, it says there's going to be 16 pickup trucks on this. So I imagine the traffic impact is not high, but
Correct.
certainly greater than a regular residential
It is.
lot would be, so.
Yes, and a regular residential lot. It identified in the letter of intent around 50, approximately 50 trips, definitely less than the threshold that we require in our engineering criteria manual for a traffic study. We don't anticipate any major impacts to Woodman Road or the nearby intersections.
And with them having, they also listed 2 skid steers. So I'm imagining those would be trailered in and out of the property. Will that have an impact on the, I mean, that's a residential road, right? So,
It's a residential local roadway,
Right.
but with the additional traffic, it wouldn't necessitate a reclassification of that roadway to like a collector roadway.
okay. So we're not concerned about wear and tear on the surface?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
With additional traffic, you're always going to get a little bit more wear and tear, but there's sufficient to handle the amount of traffic that's going to be added.
Okay.
Mr. Whitney, go ahead.
Just real quick follow-up on Mr. Trobert's question. Thank you. Again, for my education, so there's a threshold after which a traffic study is necessary.
Correct.
This 50 trips doesn't hit that threshold.
Correct.
Is that threshold the same no matter the character of the neighborhood? Wouldn't it make a difference if you, okay?
It would not make a difference. We have a threshold in our engineering criteria manual of 100 average daily trips.
Right.
Or 10 peak hour trips
Okay.
typically. There's a few other bullet points that they would have to meet to not provide a traffic study. But typically the main one is that 100
thank
average daily trips.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do you have any additional questions for me?
Any other questions? Mr. Carlson?
I just wonder on who makes the decision with this, that this gets on which schedule gets put on for a regular item or a consent item? Seems by definition, a variance is not a consent item. It needs to be looked at. Is it?
That is decided at our staff meeting for the agenda set.
Mr. Chair, that would be me. All right, and with consultation with the director.
And for the record, you are?
Justin Kilgore, the planning manager. Yes, sir. The code does kind of speak in certain language where one could be led to believe that an item like this should be a regular item. However, the board's rules provide for if there is a unanimous vote at the planning commission and there's no opposition to an item, then it would go on their consent calendar. Since there was no comments whatsoever on this item for us, we put it on y'all's consent calendar. However, staff was aware that a couple of the planning commissioners may have had some questions or comments, so staff was prepared to make a presentation on this.
Okay, thanks.
And
Yes, sir.
And our notification criteria would have covered pretty much that whole neighborhood, correct? All those, the residential residences around that? It's not just adjacent anymore. Is that not correct?
Let me look and see what the radius was on that, and I'll get right back to you.
Thank you.
That was one of my issues was I think there were 14 notices sent out. And if you count the lots around that property, there's 14 of them. And almost half of them were commercial uses.
Sir, it was a 500-foot notification.
Okay, so 14 notices, kind of clarified, just the adjacent ones. Okay, well, I think Mr. Trowbridge had said it's a compatibility question for you, and I just want to make sure we kind of cover all the bases for that. Any other questions for Ms. Elgin? And then I will give the applicant an opportunity to come up if she wants it. Any other questions for staff? You want to wait for the applicant?
Just a heads up, sir, and to piggyback on Mr. Trowbridge, I'd be interested in a description of the peculiar and exceptional practical difficulty and undue hardship. So Mr. Trowbridge is on compatibility and I'm on the other.
Okay, let's bring Ms. Ruiz up here to talk on behalf of the applicant.
Nina Reese with Vertex Consulting, and I jotted down a few of the questions, so I'll kind of address them. I don't know that it doesn't sound like I need to go through my whole presentation, so I won't, based on what I'm hearing. Starting off with the question of notice that you had, Mr. Carlson, I think one important thing to remember is that in addition to letters getting sent out to the neighbors, the property's also posted with a sign. So even if they weren't sent a notice, they still could have viewed that sign and could have chose to make comments at that time. So really anybody that drives by that property was provided notice. Even though a neighborhood meeting was not required because this is a very, very small scale application, the property owner and business owner did choose to go and speak with each and every one of his neighbors before he even submitted. That's something that him and I discussed early on, and we thought that it was important to make sure that they didn't have any specific concerns, any specific areas that they wanted to see screened that maybe weren't necessarily required in the code that we could adjust. So he went and talked to every single one of those neighbors before he submitted. And the application that you see reflects those discussions. So they felt comfortable with all of his equipment being stored inside, and that the buildings essentially screen where most of the activity will take place, which is just loading and unloading. So that did happen. So they went above and beyond in that way. There was a question of compatibility as well. So I'm going to go to, because there were also questions regarding the uses. So I'm going to start here. Okay. So this is absolutely an area of transition. Many of you will probably remember other variants of use requests for another area of town that's very close by, south of Woodman, near Black Forest, where Black Forest terminates in Woodman. That as well is an area of transition where variants of uses are quite frequent. The city is not quite immediately adjacent, but it's coming. So usually when that happens, these rural areas start to have transition where they will temporarily turn into contractor equipment yards, other light commercial type activities that don't require central services before they transition into city development. This is exactly the same. As you can see, there are numerous other contractor equipment yards in the area. They include, the person right behind is an electric contractor. The other one right up here is, they actually do earthwork. So if you drive by their property, you will be able to see big, huge equipment out in their front yard. It's not screened. So as far as compatibility and use compatibility, they are compatible with the other existing surrounding land uses because they are choosing to store all of their equipment indoors. From a visual standpoint, their use will also be visually compatible with the existing rural developments, because it's also within the character of this area to have very, very large outbuildings. So these outbuildings, he's choosing to make them appear as though they're pole barns. So from a visual standpoint, there won't be any issues there either. To go along with that, I'm going to go to a different slide. So there's quite a bit of existing vegetation with the site development plan that is under review right now. We're proposing some additional screening of just those parking areas, but I thought it was important to show you what that existing vegetation looks like to further demonstrate the visual compatibility. So these are the existing trees and shrubs, and then from the roadway, you'll see the parking area is going to be in here. He's proposing to add an additional fence to screen from the front even further. And then those buildings are behind all of these trees. So what he's proposing, if you compare this to the site plan, is coming in here and then there being a driveway that swings back where these thick trees are. So you will have screening of where all of those activities occur of unloading and loading the equipment for the day will be screened by both the existing vegetation as well as the structures themselves. This is another view of that stand of trees. So he has both deciduous trees and evergreen trees. So there will be year-round screening that way. So those were the big things that oh, that's not true. Mr. Whitney, you said that you had a concern with hardship.
Mr. Chair, may I? I was just interested in that being one of the criteria, as you well know, that is to be considered along with several others. So it's not necessarily the end all be all, but what is the peculiar hardship or difficulty with not getting the variance?
Sure. So as I said before, this is an area of transition. So rural residential land uses are making less and less sense in this area as the city development encroaches and as some of these properties get transferred from rural farms into these other businesses that are coming in. Additionally, the other option would be to rezone the property from the RR5 to a commercial zone district.
And I agree with your argument that I saw in your letter of intent on that. My concern is not which of those mechanisms is better. My concern is why is there a need to do it in the first place? So I completely agree with you that to rezone would be ridiculous. So the other mechanism is a use variance. And the question is, what's the hardship that causes either one of those mechanisms to be used?
The hardship is that it's the only option. I mean, this line of thinking is the same. You could ask the same question of somebody who's wanting to rezone their property from an RR5 to a CC where it does make sense. You could say, well, there's other commercial or industrial properties in the county. You could choose to buy that. Why don't you move there instead?
Yeah.
So that's...
It sounds like this, what you're really saying to us is this is a holding action pending what happens next with annexation. That's basically what I think you're saying.
Yeah, and that's what's within the letter of intent essentially as well.
Yep.
You can see that this area is surrounded. It's essentially, an enclave at this point of the city. Rezoning and annexing to this city of Colorado Springs is not an option at the moment.
Right.
Gaining contiguity would be challenging. And even beyond that, extending utilities at this point for one individual lot doesn't make much sense.
No, I appreciate it. And I don't even necessarily disagree with you. I'm just sort of interested in, everybody else gets to do it, so why can't I, in my mind, is not an undue hardship. So that's what I'm wrestling with. But I appreciate your comments.
Okay.
Any other, Mr. Carlson?
Yeah, you've said it was in an area of change, but in the staff's report on page 13, it's specifically an area of minimal change. It's surrounded by area of change, but this
An
whole
area of transition is the wording that I believe I used. Maybe I
okay.
didn't use that consistently, and if so, I apologize. This is, so
It's
I will
labeled,
go to
it's
this
labeled as
slide.
an area of minimal change.
So it is adjacent to areas of annexation. So that in itself could be considered. As we know, the lines within the master plan are not hard and solid. And so if there's a potential impact of a key area, even if it's not within that key area, the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners could take that into consideration. So there's that. And then also, so minimal change developed is the specific area of change. So it states the character of these areas is defined by lack of development and presence of significant natural areas. These areas will experience some redevelopment of select underutilized or vacant sites adjacent to other built-out sites, but such, I must have a typo, there's not a 9 there. Such redevelopment will be limited in scale as to not alter the essential character. So the essential character, per this slide, the essential character is that the properties are not just rural residential. They have other commercial land uses, other, light industrial type land uses.
Do you know if all those have variances or whatever they need to perform under?
I don't, and I always try not to do that because I don't want to point out violations and people get mad. So
And then you
I'm
mentioned,
just showing you it's there.
you mentioned he talked to all his neighbors about the use. Was they just the neighbors that touch his site or across the street or what have you, or?
They are. So they were the people that would be the most directly impacted. So all of the properties, like you said, that are immediately adjacent, so both sides and then in the back and then across the street as well, which did include this fellow right here.
Great, thanks.
Mr.
Fuller?
So the other business uses are, this one it's not owner occupied. Are those other ones owner occupied? Or because I think there is a difference between just an investment property where you're putting your contractor yard versus you live there.
Sure. That I don't know if they're owner occupied or not. The business owner and property owner has said that he may choose to live there. He's not converting the existing home into an office. So he may choose to live there, but he currently has a home elsewhere. So he's going through the variance of use process instead of, if he lived there, that would be considered a rural home occupation, which wouldn't require this process.
He could have a contractor yard as rural home occupation without a variance? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Mr. Chair,
You can confirm that with staff if you'd like.
I think he would need a special use permit to have a rural home occupation.
That's correct, but that's administrative versus variance of use.
Right, but it can be administrative or a special use permit. But as I see it now, he's not. If he gets this variance of use, he's turning this property into a contractor's equipment yard.
That is correct.
At that point, he's not allowed to live in there.
That is not correct. That's specifically stated in the staff report as well, that he may choose to live there at some point.
But that's not what the variance is asking.
So the variance, and staff absolutely can step in. The variance allows for an additional use. It does not take away your underlying rights within that zone district.
Yeah, we'll get staff back up to talk to the specific code and what this means.
Before I walk away, though,
goes, tell us, yes, before you walk away, tell
Before
us
I
about
walk
this
away,
specific application
yeah,
and what we're asking
yeah.
for and
I think
what
the
that means.
important thing to remember, this got pulled off of consent because there was a concern specifically with compatibility. When we look at the existing uses surrounding this property, there are many, many other very, very similar uses surrounding this property who have not necessarily taken the same care that the property owner is proposing to ensure that all of the elements of that business are screened from view. They have outside storage. He is not proposing outside storage. He's proposing that everything is contained within the building. Even his parking area, he is screening that parking area from view from everyone else. So if the concern is compatibility, I would find it hard to say that he is not compatible with what's out there today.
Mr. Trowbridge.
And thank you, Ms. Ruiz, for addressing my concern. I know that this particular area, Pawnee Estates, has kind of a storied history with surrounding projects and stuff, and so I'm glad that the applicant took the time to go visit his neighbors and didn't get any pushback. So, and I appreciate your presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anything else for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So, Ms. Elgin or Mr. Kilgore, can you speak to us on what does granting a variance in this case actually do versus what the applicant wants? And if you can address Mr. Murray's concerns, questions, that'd be great.
Justin and I discussed this yesterday. As the applicant didn't ask for an additional use on the property, that's not what is in this. You could change your motion. You could add that in if you wanted to. But as it is requested right now, if he wanted to move in, he would have to come back and get a special use permit for a rural home occupation.
That's how I read it. I read the variance of use paragraph in here, and in the letter of intent, multiple times it says, it says he may ask or may do in the future, may live there, but multiple times, including on page 5, it says the property owner is requesting a variance of use to allow a contractor's equipment yard. It says, there's nothing in there going to add, a contractor's equipment yard to this rural residence, and he's not living there right now. So I don't see in the variance of use paragraph where it says it's an additive thing. It's magically turning into something that isn't allowed currently in that zoning district. You're getting a variance. So with that, I would, and again, this is not really germane to this agenda item, but if the applicant wants at a certain point to live in that house, need to come back to the county to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And with that, if there is a chance that that the applicant may live in there, I would go ahead and follow the rules for the special use in a rural residence, because there are certain setback limits that are there that currently this project is not meeting. And so, with some adjustments to this project during the site development plan, I think you can set yourself up for success in the future.
I wanted to take the time to have this little excursion because I think it's important, first of all, that it's not the applicant's responsibility to interpret the code for us. So we asked the question of staff to give us that answer. Likewise, the applicant pointed out existing uses, but took pains not to comment on what's officially approved in any of those areas, because we could maybe have this conversation about every single one of them, whether they're owner occupied or not. That's not something that we typically consider. I think I'm correct in saying that when we do these things. You don't go and double check everybody around just to make sure that they've complied with the rules. So I think that's useful, and I think it's important for us to remind ourselves, even though we may recognize the applicant's representative and know that he or she has a pretty good knowledge, it's not the applicant's job to do that, it's staff's job. So we want to keep that focus in the correct place. And the last thing, I just want to clarify again for myself, because as I read the approval criteria in our staff package, peculiar and exceptional hardship or difficulties or undue hardship is one of those criteria that we may consider. In this case, it's not one that we must consider. So we have considerable amount of flexibility here to do that. And as long as it's not a typo in the packet, may versus must is an important distinction that I just want to point out.
Mr. Chair, if I may provide a piece of clarification as well. Ryan Hauser, Planning Community Development. For the record, by nature, we've always considered a variance of use or a special use as an additional principal use on the property. So in a case such as this, they would be adding the contractor's equipment yard as another principal use of the property, they wouldn't necessarily have to state in the variance of use there's also a house on the property, since that's not associated with the variance of use. And the same logic would generally apply to a special use as well.
Okay, so again, not really particular to this application, but good information for us in the future, Mr. Moraes.
Yeah, just to go back to one of your other comments about asking her, I did actually, in an email, did ask about, hey, those other properties that we see on that chart, the kennel and the gunsmith and all that other stuff, do we have stuff on file for them? And the information I got back is yes, there's a special use permit for the kennel. There's a home occupation for the sale of the firearms, and it was in 2012. So yes, those things have run for the most part of those, however many items there are. For the most part, there is documentation that people did it the right way.
Yeah, I think which reflects the fact that, as the applicant points out, there's a lot of transition going on here, and there's things that are happening. It's not your typical RR5 residential where there's just a bunch of people living there. There's a lot more going on. So, okay, any other questions for staff? Mr. Carlson, go ahead.
I just want to confirm that, in my mind, if it were just a variance of use for a contractor's yard, I don't think that's compatible in any way, shape, or form. But the way they've stated it in one of the notes is that they're asking for this according to how they've outlined it in their proposal. And in their proposal, as Nina stated, all their commercial equipment's going to be stored indoors. And so that makes a big difference for me in talking about this, is that if everything's inside, you could have a bunch of cows inside there. You could be living there. So I don't have as much of a problem, but my concern is, where does this get listed when somebody's got a complaint down the road, there's 18 buses stored there and mountains of rock and whatever else. Where does the enforcement folks see this information? That, hey, originally they said they're going to keep everything indoors. Do they have to dig down through 27 pages of this stuff to see what was done, or is it, because the notation just says it's everything they asked for in their proposal?
Yes. They would go back to the letter of intent. If code enforcement was called out, they would, because of the notations, they would go back into the letter of intent and say this is what's allowed to be stored.
But the easy thing to see is that the variance was approved. And then they would just go, well, yeah, okay,
That is
okay.
correct.
Yeah.
That is correct, as long as it's all indoors, because that's what they're requesting.
Well, I understand, but what the basic approval is approval for this variance of use. But the detail is buried down in this letter somewhere. I guess my question is, how far down does the enforcement folks go to see what? Because their initial finding is going to be that the variance was approved for a contractor's yard, and they're going to go, oh, well, that's approved.
Could be. I'm not familiar with the way, how deep code enforcement digs.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Kilgore.
I happen to have a planner in here that was the previous code enforcement supervisor, if you care for him to answer.
Excellent. Excellent.
Sure, as long as he can do it briefly.
Wow.
Very brief. Joseph Letke, that's correct. I used to supervise the code enforcement team. If we were to receive a complaint for this variance, we'd look at the letter of intent, we'd look at the approval resolutions, we'd look at the site development plan. And if it's in any way out of compliance with any of those documents, they would be issued a notice of violation. They would have to come in to either redo their plan, resubmit an appropriate land use application, or they would have to bring it back to how it was originally approved. Does that answer your question?
It sure does. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Fuller.
So, Mr. Carlson, but I think that what you're asking might be, how would mere mortals such as us look easily and see that it's all undercover versus, most people don't know how to log in and look at all these underlying documents, or they could talk to a neighbor and have a complaint and they say, I have it approved as a variance. And how would someone know that the variance is for it all to be covered?
Typically, they contact the POD and the POD researches it for them.
Yeah. And so again, we've talked about a lot of stuff. Thank you, Ms. Elgin. I think we're done. Talked about a lot of stuff, and I just want to make sure that we do not unfairly consider some of these peripheral things that are outside the scope of the application in front of us. And I will remind, because I think it's important in light of the possible violation discussion, the applicant has talked to the neighbors. The applicant has let them know what he intends to do. And I would hope that anybody's first step in addressing a suspected violation would be to go knock on their neighbor's door and say, hey, what's with this? Can you move this, move this truck? I don't think us mere mortals, certainly this mere mortal wouldn't try to log in and look at anything. I'd go talk to somebody else first, but, and ideally that would be the neighbor. So, since I only have the soapbox for a couple more weeks, I'll get off of it now. And one last chance, any other, Mr. Trowbridge?
Are you ready for a motion?
I am. Move me along, please.
I apologize.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Kilgore.
could I just get you to clarify whether this is a consent item with questions or if we are making this a regular item
think we
today,
made
a
it a
called up
regular.
consent item?
Yeah, and thank you, 'cause, yes, I think we have made it a regular item, and so I need to make sure that there's no one in the audience who would like to speak in favor of or opposed. And I see that the applicant might want to make another comment. Ms. Ruiz? Okay, so if we have public comments, it's typically not as a question and answer session. It is a statement from somebody in the public, either in favor of or opposed to an application. If you'd like to make a comment, you're welcome to do that. You could pose rhetorical questions, and perhaps the applicant would come back and answer them in her response time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing
For the record, please
sorry.
state your name, and then I think we should have a sign-in sheet someplace, just so we have spelling and all that correct after you're done.
Yeah, Chris Martin. My only concern is that because this is a contractor lay-down yard, is if they're going to store any landscaping materials that have any chemicals that might affect that creek that runs on the backside of the property of Sand Creek, and that might impact the environmental area. That's my only reason I would oppose it. After, besides that, if they have measures to take care of that, then I have no issues with it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Martin. Ms. Ruiz?
Amy Reese with Vertex. So to answer that question, no. There will be no items stored outside. As part of the site development plan review as well, Stormwater will review the proposal to ensure that there's not going to be any flows going into that creek that haven't been properly cleaned. I apologize. I did want to just get up here one last time just because I am concerned with them having to submit a variance of use if they choose to live in the home in the future, because I think that is absolutely a possibility. My interpretation of the code is obviously not the same as the current interpretation of the code. Mine was similar to what Ryan Hauser had stated, that you didn't lose your underlying land uses. So within the letter of intent where I had stated that they may choose to live in the home in the future, I didn't think that I needed to add a specific line saying contractor's equipment yard, live in the home. So I am very concerned. So if there is a motion to approve, I would respectfully request that you include in that motion the allowance for them to live in the home in the future, because I'm sure they don't want to have to go back through the variance of use process to live there.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hauser, Ms. Elgin, Mr. Kilgore, somebody over there, is that necessary? We heard a couple of different ways to interpret what this variance would do. And I'm not quick enough to pick up on all the nuances of the different versions that I heard. So if Mr. Hauser, if staff believes that as presented to us, the resolution allows what the applicant just asked for, then we can go with what we have in front of us. If we need to know, if we need to add another notation, if we so chose, to allow that use as the applicant understands the request, then we need to know that.
This is just my philosophical thought on this.
Which we're always interested in.
Is the land development code says you have to read the language literally. I know there may be a policy or how we've done it, in the past, maybe one way. But if, let's say, the Board of County Commissioners come down and say, hey, how you're doing it right now, we don't like how you're doing it right now. You need to do it literally and, or change the code. And so that's where my caution is, that if we go under the assumption that today we say that, it's just an additive use in this variance of use, and between now and when the applicant decides to go live in that house, let's say there is a thought change or a process change, and all of a sudden they say, no, it's not additive. And now we're setting an applicant up or a citizen up to be in violation of the code because of how it's interpreted at a lower level, or how it's applied at a lower level. So, the code does say you're supposed to read the code literally. That's in there. And so that is where my big caution. I don't have a problem with the contractor's equipment yard. My problem is if all of a sudden they want to go live in it, and really then it becomes, and really maybe my concern to the planners would be, hey, is it really that much different than doing a rural home occupation at that moment? And maybe they should encourage the applicant to follow those rules, because there are rules in the land development code on setbacks and stuff if it was a special use rural occupation, home occupation. So I know we're not that far down, the road, that these things can be adjusted, maybe live to the intent of the code in setting this up for success for the community. So that's just my philosophical thought process on, hey, what's codified and how it's executed on a day-to-day basis, because that day-to-day basis may change.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Especially with a land use code revision currently underway. My guess is it will go back to, if we've strayed from strict interpretation, we'd go back to that. Mr. Kilgore, you glanced up from your furious research.
Yes, sir. I think it would make it cleaner, as well as make it easier for the board to make a concise decision if it was stated on the record that was absolutely something that was an intent in the future. And that's just because of the language in Section 534, variance of use, Section D, limit of approval, sorry, not plural. And I think if it was stated on the record that was an intended use, then that would cover all the bases.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, does it need to be an added notation? Is that what you're requesting?
Yeah, I think it can be a notation, but I think if it's stated on the record, it's covered.
So, Mr. Chair, could the applicant adjust the letter of intent before the Board of County Commissioners? Would that be kosher, that the letter of intent gets changed before it hits them, or should we make it a motion, a condition? I don't know which way is easier.
I don't think it's necessarily necessary.
I'll just put it in the motion.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Items can be changed from Planning Commission to Board of County Commissioners at the Planning Commission's direction.
Okay. And I guess, well, this may be a consent item anyway to the Board of County Commissioners if it's a 9-0 vote, but we'll make sure that we do the right thing so that if my interpretation, I think Mr. Trowbridge will reflect this, but I just want to say it out loud because to make sure that I'm correct, is that the language of the resolution is going to reflect the understanding that the applicant expects that the right to occupy the current residence continues despite the approval of a variation, or along with the variation, along with the approval of a variance.
What?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Trowbridge.
I apologize to my fellow commissioners for opening this can of worms.
Thank you, Mr. Trowbridge.
Was not my intent
You are not forgiven.
to do that.
Some good discussions, though. I mean, useful. So, but moving on.
Yeah.
Return to the bar.
Yeah, go back to the part. Okay. Mr. Chair, as regards agenda item 3D, file number VA248, the variance of use for 7695 Ponca Road, Turfmaster LLC, I move we recommend approval with two conditions and 4 notations plus an added 5th notation regarding the ability of the owner to live in the house existing on the property, and that this item be forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners for the, let me back up. In accordance with the attached resolution, and that this item be forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners for their consideration.
Second.
Did I get all that?
Thank you, Ms. Jack, for the second. Anybody want to get one more smack at
I
the
just
horse?
want to make one last comment. Again, I'll just reiterate, I encourage the applicant to, in the spirit of intent, which would otherwise be a rural home occupation, a contractor's yard in a R5 zoning district, I would encourage them to just look at the requirements of the setbacks in paragraph 5229 of the Land Development Code.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Ms. Jack.
Aye.
Mr. Byers. Aye. Mr. Carlson.
Aye.
Sorry, did I get a second? Did I skip that part?
It was Sarah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, I just didn't write it down. I'm sorry.
Pay attention.
So where was? Sorry.
That's senioritis.
Right.
It's been a long morning.
Too much
I believe I met Ms. Fuller,
Aye.
Mr. Moraes.
Aye.
Mr. Shipples.
Aye.
Mr. Trowbridge.
Aye.
Mr. Whitney.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye as well. We will recommend this to the Board of County Commissioners for their approval. That's all the items on our agenda. Our next meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks from today on March 20th. I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you for your patience. We made it just over an hour, or just at an hour.
Good job.
Thank you for helping kill time for till my next appointment. So thank you very much. Ms. Ruiz, as we're adjourned, one thing for you. Before you leave, let me talk to you, please. I just think I saw something on her slide that needs to be fixed before it goes to the county commissioners, if it goes to the county commissioners.
Spotted a typo.
Sort of, yeah, I think. But again, who knows? With my,
Senioritis.
my decreased mental functions, I did